So I've got a question for you. Whereabouts were you on Thursday morning? Because if you were a resident of Moscow, then you were awakening to a sound that you've been trained for years not to hear. Thuds, smoke, and then suddenly you're looking outside of your window whilst Russian state TV says that nothing of interest is happening. Come around to Friday morning and the same thing happens again. All because of a small welcome gift from Ukraine. Now, I've spent years studying Russia, visiting the country many times, and following this conflict from both sides of the divide. And I'm going to be straight with you. I've never seen Russia this vulnerable. Not on the battlefield, not economically, and not in terms of what its own people are now seeing with their own eyes. What happened in Moscow this week was something different. Something that changes the entire texture of this war in a way that will be very hard to reverse, if not impossible. And what's happening with the propaganda and those that try to deny or say just how much Russia is winning, let alone Putin's muted response, tells you everything you need to know.
This is the Global Gambit.
How are we going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, where it has been possibly the worst week for Vladimir Putin. Now, what we're seeing right now is generally unprecedented in anything else we've seen. And I want to know what you guys think. Is this a game changer for Moscow, for Putin, as some in his own Russian side have called it? Or is it a machine, a system that can still absorb it? Let me know in the comments. Now let's establish what happened, because scale and numbers matter. Simply, Ukraine launched 992 drones at Russia in a single assault on a single day. The largest in Ukraine's history. Not just the Ukraine's history though, the whole of the war. This was a common tactic of what is defining modern warfare with drones. Simply to saturate the entire air defense systems simultaneously until things get through. And things, many things, got through. Most infamously, the oil refinery in Pyotr, covering 40%, not 14, but 40% of Moscow's gasoline needs. A fuel storage vessel's roof was blown clear off, visible across the entire city. Multiple fires raging on all four of Moscow's airports. Therefore, the biggest and most important in the country shut down completely. Part of the ring road around the city was closed. A shopping mall, a residential building, at least 17 casualties. And photographs from various different neighborhoods, especially in the east, showing cars, buildings, streets covered in this dark residue. But something, of course, the propagandist and diplomatic parts of the government will deny, stating that was actually something else. And then more shots on Friday, where the first confirmed fatality, an 8-year-old girl, means that Russia's population are now feeling this war like the Ukrainians have for the best part of 4, if not 10, 12 years. Now, here's a detail that tells you how significant these strikes have been. You see, Moscow has 3 rings of air defense, concentric layers of protection built specifically to shield the capital. All 3 of these were pierced by cheap, mass-produced drones. This is the same category of weapon Ukraine was on the receiving end at the start of this war, and has now fired back at Russian territory. The damage to the refinery alone will impact fuel supplies, potentially producing the kind of petrol queues that we've seen happening many, many times, but in Ukraine, not in Russia. For the first time in this war, the consequences of Russia's invasion were not something Muscovites read about or watched on the screen. They were physically felt and visibly seen from their own apartment windows. And that is a different kind of sensation, a different kind of pressure than anything the Kremlin has had to manage before. Now, to understand why this week is so significant, you also have to understand the broader geopolitical and diplomatic landscape that has been shifting in the past few months, or just this week. When Trump returned to the White House in early 25, he believed Ukraine was going to lose. Those were the comments made by Macron in a pretty extraordinary interview just earlier today. Everything went badly in the Oval Office in that infamous meeting, and then Putin's meeting with Trump in Anchorage. There was a genuine feeling amongst European nations, let alone Ukraine, that a deal was being struck on the sidelines. And European leaders flew to Washington to ensure that that wouldn't happen. But that was some time ago. And this week, at the G7 in France, Zelensky secured a statement of unwavering support from everybody, including the US. And Trump, who had seen as favoriting Putin is signaling more and more his recognition of the despot's desire to not actually seek peace. Trump is stepping back and giving more room without any American equivocation. Indeed, Macron put it plainly of all. We have come a very long way since then, and President Trump has said everything he's been told, that Ukraine would fail, that they would not survive each and every winter, has turned out to be false. On the European side, negotiations have formally opened for Ukraine's membership to the EU, and a €90 billion loan affirmed for disbursement this month. Ukraine's defense minister has announced $4 billion in new military aid pledges, and Zelensky has used his meeting with Trump to request permission to access Patriot defense missile blueprints so that Ukraine can use them themselves. This is not something or a country scrambling for survival. This is a country building sustained industrial capacity in an offensive sense, let alone defensive. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry also reposted footage of their attacks across Moscow with a simple line: in Moscow, everything is going according to plan. It's just not Putin's plan. And then we come to Russia's three main state television channels that, well, they just didn't include it. No dedicated segment. Anchors briefly quoted official statements from the city's mayor and governor, but by afternoon, two of the three had dropped the story entirely, reflecting not incompetence, but a calculated decision to treat the most visually demonstration of Ukraine's military reach as not something worth discussion. The problem is that over 13 million people have seen that from their windows, on their phones, felt the smoke, and they can post videos, posting videos to such an extent that Russia has been trying to manage its information environment since the first day of the invasion, throttling YouTube, banning Telegram, criminalizing independent reporting. But what Thursday and Friday have shown is that the architecture of that control has a fundamental weakness. You can't ban smoke and you can't sanction rain. You cannot arrest your way out of a burning refinery visible from half the city. To take it a step further, Russia's own propagandists have been focused on one thing: trying to demonize and stop their own fellow citizens from sharing this. Infamous commentator Solovyov demanded on his morning broadcast that everybody posting footage be thrown in prison. VGTRK's deputy director asked where the criminal cases were for all those filming the strikes, and a notable Telegram host called on security forces to use facial recognition to identify people posting videos, arrest them, and even break them during interrogations. A government that believes its own narrative does not spend the morning after the Lotus drone attack on its own capital threatening to jail its own citizens for looking out of their windows. You only try to silence what you cannot explain, and Putin certainly cannot explain why half of Moscow is on fire. Now, something you'll hear me often say is that Putin, when secluding himself, does so because he doesn't have an answer, and in these deteriorating realities of his invasion, or SMO, surrounding himself with people who simply tell him what he wants to hear, insulating himself between the reality and imagination. But the images from Moscow's skyline on Thursday mark a moment even the thickest layers of insulation around Kremlin cannot shield him from. And it gets even better, because there were reports that Putin was hiding, sheltering in his infamous bunker. And these countless videos by his own citizens that are supposedly in awe of him are not just a propaganda problem, they are a political one. The relentless posting of footage, despite the threats and the warnings, is itself a signal of growing dissent, of a population losing its deference, of message management that is faltering. Since one small drone hit the Kremlin in 2023, Moscow's skyline has been periodically troubled by Ukraine, enough to force Victory Day's parade to be scaled back, but Thursday was a new level of undeniable scale, and it has only been reinforced by the threatening, criminalizing and demanding of facial recognition by the very people who are paid or managed to exercise the rhetoric on their behalf. The most loyal pro-war bloggers are cracking, and some have praised the air defences for intercepting these drones, even whilst the refinery was burning, but even one writing that, most honestly, no air defence system in the world can withstand a massive overload and deliver 100% results. Now, this one particular commentator meant it as a defence of air defence systems, but the fact that we've even reached this point where we're having to try and argue and explain the effectiveness of the air defence systems of the city, let alone that they're entering Russian airspace at all, is the difference of progress and momentum one side has over the other. Now, surprisingly, of course not, Putin has said nothing about the bombardment. He was actually at a summit in Kurzin. State news minimised it, and Rosneft's chief executive acknowledged, though, that fuel supply problems existed, attributing them to what's become infamous now: unscheduled maintenance. It is an official euphemism at this point for Russian media and official communications. Coupled to that, Putin has been forced to admit that economic damage done by Ukrainian strikes is growing, acknowledge territory is not being taken as fast as he wants, and endure the mounting public discontent over the periodical internet shutdowns. These are admissions of reality from a Kremlin whose war effort has rarely accepted anything short of total victory. Now Russia's hardliners are calling for total escalation, some demanding Moscow eliminate the entire Ukrainian leadership, some even going further with the emphasis on nuclear options again. And so these are not words of people in control. These are words of people who are frightened of what happens inside Russia if this continues and, well, nothing visibly changes. But Putin is now in a trap. There are very few practical avenues he has where he can escalate without making things even worse. Hitting NATO states directly would be a catastrophic gamble for a military struggling to dominate its smaller neighbour. Nuclear weapons risk the fury of the US, Europe, and even China to minimal strategic gain. And Russia is already hitting Ukraine with everything largely it has. It's in full level war economy, and its Oreshnik ballistic missile? Well, it's constrained by its own limited infantries. The most likely response is what Russia always tends to do when it's humiliated, especially on its own territory: a renewed wave of missiles and drone strikes indiscriminately across countries. This will happen, and it will change the fundamental calculus, including for the 13 million plus Muscovites who can't unsee what they saw this week. 4 years ago, Putin launched his SMO, expecting to take Ukraine within a week, or perhaps 10 days. Moscow was supposed to be insulated from all of this, and the lives of the Dacha season and Muscovites or the people from St. Petersburg going around as normal. But this week has demonstrated how closer to home the war is getting. More and more, day by day, the situation for Russians is becoming more and more similar to what Ukrainians have been enduring for many years. Ukraine is showing it has the capacity to take the fight to Moscow and even toy with Putin through its psychological warfare. Leaders like Macron or von der Leyen have said that the tide is turning, and the Lithuanian president has called it, as I said at the beginning, a game changer. It is domestically where Putin is suffering most perilously right now, and this geographical buffer that has been the biggest benefit, perhaps, of Russia for not just years but decades, is even showing its limitations with modern warfare. I said that I have never seen Russia this vulnerable before, and I certainly don't think we've seen anything like it yet, as in much more is likely to come. But thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, then of course give it a like, and if you're interested in understanding what the war in Ukraine and Russia is really about from someone who's on both sides, living from both sides, understanding it, and having been in the realms of international relations and geopolitics for many years at this point, then you're in the right place. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.